Hey, what's up everyone? Today I'm going to share another power line against fish. Actually, it's two lines. First, it's the float bet, and we will compare it a little bit against the check bet line. We most of the time want to play one of these lines, and today I'll explain you in detail when we want to use the float bet and when we want to use the check bet line. Let's start with defining what a float bet is, because not every one of you will know this term. Every tracker has a little bit of a different name for this. So if you use Poker Tracker 4, the stat there is called bet versus missed c-bet. So when your opponent is not c-betting the flop out of position and we take a stab at the pot. So this is a float bet. If you're a little bit old school, you might be a bit confused because like back in the days, what we called a float is when someone is betting the flop, then like calling the flop with the intention to pick up the pot on the turn when our opponent is checking. That was called a float back in the days. But nowadays a float bet is when your opponent is checking. So bet versus missed c-bet. So just that everyone is on the same page. So that now that we defined what a float bet is, we can go and analyze our opponents to define when we actually want to do a float bet. I marked like the overall check fold versus float bet, and it's 47% in a limp pot, right? So we will talk today mainly about limp pots. This is working extremely well in limp pots, and in race pots it's working fine as well, but you need to be a little bit more careful. So this might be a topic for a different coaching. And today we'll focus on limp pots, and there the check fold is 47%. So in theory, we can always take like bet the flop, especially in a limp pot. When we bet 1BB, we only need around 33% fold equity, and we have really, really high fold equity. So 47% is way more than what we need to make an auto profit. However, on the right, you see the different board structures and how much our opponents are actually folding against the bet on different board structures. And it will be very clear when we take a look here that the drier the board, the better it is. And so best example is ace-x dry, right? When you are playing against a regular and someone is not betting on an ace-8-4 flop, then you probably get a little bit suspicious and you think he has like a lot of like short-on value hands and probably not too much of a fold. However, this is not true for recreational players. They just don't really know the concept of a c-bet. And very often what recreations are doing, they just play by feeling, right? So they don't like their hand, they don't like the flop, so they just check fold. So they're checking and basically they're done with their hand. And that's why the fold equity on a lot of dry boards is very high, right? So you see it on ace-x dry, it's 58%. On low paired boards, it's also very high, 57%. And on high paired boards, so king 5, etc., it's 46%. And on king queen high dry, so king 8 deuce, etc., it's 45%. So on all of these, the fold equity is very high. On the other hand, if you take a look at more dynamic flops, right? So low board dynamic, this is like a 7-6-5. Mid dynamic, this is like jack 10-8, etc. On these kind of flops, the fold equity is relatively low, right? So 37%, and that's very normal. So our opponents will just hit the flop quite often, right? So they might have a pair, or they will have some kind of gut shot or overcards. So the fold equity on the flop will be relatively low. And yes, so what we mainly want to do is to bet on dry flops, especially with our airballs, right? So if we miss the flop, then betting on these will definitely generate an auto profit. And how we play on turns and rivers, we might see on a couple examples in a practical part. And just to add here, also on the mid unconnected flops, right? So something like Jack A3, this is also pretty profitable with 47%. And yes, so you see like 47 here is also a relatively high number, because like if you take a look at all these, you might think, yeah, okay, like why is it 47? Because usually the fault equity is lower than 47. But the main reason is that I bet more often on these kind of flops, because I know, of course, when to flop bet and when not, and less often on these kind of flops, right? And therefore, I just have more opportunities. And this stat here is just for every occasion, right? And I just use more occasions on good flop structures. That's why it's 47. If I would see bet, because you might think, yeah, I mean 47, I just simplify my game and I will just bet like 100% against any opponents, any board, right? So if it's a fish, I just bet. I mean, even like on low board dynamic, it's profitable, right? 37%. It will work. However, it will work way less, because like the check fold definitely won't be 47%. If you see bet 100% against every player, the fault equity will drop down quite a bit, and it will be still pretty high, but more, I would guess, around like 40 to 42%. I think more around 42%. And yes, so it will still be good, but we can, of course, optimize it a little bit. And even if you're playing a lot of tables, this is something, if you take a look at, if you focus on that, then it's pretty easy to execute. And you'll see what I mean. It's pretty straightforward strategy, actually, when and how to play it. Okay, good. So when do we want to float bet? Like I said, mainly on dry boards, and I just put in a couple of examples to just have a little bit of a visual for you guys. Right, let me put this on the top. Here we go. Okay, yeah, you see, like ace 9 deuce. This is as dry as it can get. This is by far the best flop to do so, right? You see it here, ace 6 dry. Very good, 58%. On these, you should just always bet. Yeah, so the question is like, what are you doing with a king high or a queen high? I think it kind of depends. I think you can do both. You can bet, it's no problem. I mean, you probably only fold out worse hands, but is this really bad? Probably don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. I personally, I check back quite often, but I also play, I navigate relatively good also through turns and rivers. If you are like not as experienced as I am post flop, then just betting basically everything on ace 9 deuce makes a lot of sense, I think. Even like the king highs and queen highs, just play it one and done. And it's making your game a little bit, it's making your life a little bit easier. So yeah, so these are very, very good. King Jack 3 as well. So this is two Broadway boards are kind of tricky. Fold equity is only 42%. However, like it's still pretty good, right? So 42% is really good, and you could go for barrels on these ones, but I usually just play one and done, or I go for a delay bet or something like that. Both options are fine, but this is still one of the best flops. And also like king 5, especially on the high paired boards, you'll see a lot of folds. So they simply just check and fold because they don't like their hand. Maybe they are also afraid that you have trips or something. I don't know, but usually the fold equity is quite big. Not the best flops, but still pretty good flops. All ace highs basically. Also like ace 9-8 or ace king jack is fine as well. Because if they have like 6-3 or something and there's like an ace king jack, they just don't see bet, they just check fold. Yeah, so this is still pretty good. Jack 8-3, it can be two hearts, can be rainbow, so this mid unconnected, see, also very good. And then low paired 5-5 jack, yes, 5-5 jack, it can also be 5-5-7. 5-5 jack is way better than 5-5-7. On 5-5-7 they still have two overcards to the 7, but I think as soon as someone has just two overcards to the 5, which doesn't bring you anything, but like two undercards to the jack, so all like the 10 8s, etc., they will fold. But on 5-5, let's say 5-5-6, even if they have like 10-9, they will probably call once because they have two overcards and they can outdraw the 6, etc. So yeah, 5-5-6 is okay, still okay to bet. 5-5 jack is really good to bet. Good. So this is for the float bets. And now when do we want to check bet? So this is the alternative line. So when we don't float bet, we check the flop, right? And then the question is, when do we want to bet the turn? And how do we play turns and rivers, right? And you see already that I don't even call it like check bet check or something for because like this line unleashes all the power when it goes till the end, right? So you basically always want to bet the river when you bet the turn, with just one or two exceptions, which I will talk about briefly. But let's first explore the stats why this line is so good. And this is like a real power line. Like the float bet itself is super profitable. Check bet is insanely profitable as well. So we want to use one of these most of the time. And the cool thing is, look, our opponents are only c-betting in 35% of the time, right? So here you see the check fold with float bet. So this is from the last slide, right? So the 47%, this is actually from here, right? So I just made this screenshot from here, 47%. And the cool thing is, so they don't c-bet much. And when they don't c-bet, they also don't delay bet. This means they check and we have the opportunity to bet the flop. Or we can check back and then we will have the opportunity to bet the turn very often, very, very often, right? And when they don't see bet, here on the bottom, this is check, check, fold, and check, call, and check, fold. So this stat here is when they simply check fold the turn, it's 49%. And when they check call the turn, this is how often they check fold on the river. And you see already here that this is like insanely profitable, right? So 49%, I usually just bet like maybe 50, or maybe like if the pot is 2 BB, I bet usually 1 or 1.5 BB. And then on the river, I bet 75% of the pot most of the time. And you see how profitable this is. And what I show you here in these panels are the actual stack sizes and how often our opponent fold to the different stack sizes. And you see here that this is what I mainly use, like 50% or 75%. So this size here, right? And both are very good. So against 50%, the minimum defense frequency. So we are making an auto profit as soon as our opponent is folding more than 33%. So this is 13% of our fold. And when we bet 75%, our opponent needs to fold something around like 40%, and we 40 something, and fold equity is 57%. 57%, that's insanely high. So if our opponent's checking twice, that already shows a lot of weakness. However, if they check call, then this is where all the magic happens. So even better than before. And you see it here. So even against a 50% bet size on the river, they fold 56%, which is insane. This is super high. However, if you go like 75%, which I mainly use, they fold even more. It's like 67%. So most of you just get in like what is it? 2/3 of the time you're getting a fold when you're betting 75%. And the combination of both, just betting like what I do most of the time is 1.5 BB or maybe 1.25 or something. So I'm around here, and then I'm around here, and so the fold equity is really big. And you need also to take into consideration that I'm not doing this on very dry boards, right? So on dry boards, I usually use the float bet, right? So I use this line most of the time on kind of wet boards, right? On like low boards and on connected boards, etc. So it's not that I use like where my opponent has a lot of airballs. No, not really, right? It's just like that. What this line is working so well because our opponent is just capping himself extremely. Because like recreationals, when they only bet 35% of the time, you see that they have a very high turn and river barrel frequency. And the main reason is because they bet most of their pairs. They bet a lot of their like draws. So when they check call, they have like kind of weakish range, and it can't really stand too much too much heat, right? So yeah, it's quite good. Yeah. By the way, like check fold versus float. When they check call the flop, you can barrel. You can barrel turns and rivers. I didn't actually show it, but you can barrel turns and rivers. From the numbers, it should be profitable, but it is not as good as you might think. Okay, so this is actually not. This is how often they check fold with the check call check. Yeah, so you see, this is check call check fold, right? So this is check fold with with the flop float. This is check fold with the turn float. This means when they c bet the flop and check fold the turn. So this is not what they fold after the turn bet. This is what they fold after the turn bet. It's 37%. It's not super high, okay? However, when they call the turn, they check fold the river in 52% of the time. Again, it will depend on the sizing, so you should check it out in your database. The turn is a little bit problematic because this is not where your opponents are going to fold. Your opponents are going to fold over 3 streets, and then it gets a little bit dicey because we have one street where they don't really overfold heavily, right? So I would say pick your spots wisely. It's fine to go for triple barrels, but you can also go into a couple of bet check bet lines, which I nowadays don't use too often because like I rather like triple, or well, because when I check the turn, I usually want to call the river, right? Because it's then I'm going into the bet check snap line. Yeah, so we'll see in a couple of practical examples when and how we want to use it on turns and rivers. Okay, so now I made a little overview when I want to use the float bet and when I'm using the check bet lines. And yeah, basically it's very dry on very dry boards, which you see here on the left side. Want to use the float bet, and on the right side, these are the boards where I use the check bet line. And well, when I say I use the check bet line, I mean I mean with my air hands, right? Because if I have a value hand, of course I'm betting the flop, right? So if I have straight, I'm betting the flop. If I have 2 pairs, I'm betting the flop, right? So this is when I don't have anything, or maybe I have I don't know, maybe some draws, some weaker draws or something. I want to go for a delay and bet the river or something like that, right? So or maybe even ace highs, etc. Then I might go for a check bet line. And same for the float bet, right? So if I have a bottom pair, not necessarily need to bet. Probably it's still good. Or like on a king jack 3, I might check back the jack here and there, right? So this is what you need to decide then. Also, like with a couple of short-term value hands, etc. It's not that we always want to take these lines, but I hope to give you a little bit more clarity with the practical part, which comes after the transition. See you there.